Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carter.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carter. Today is February 5th, 2026. And tonight's episode is all about Part 18, Examination of Proverbs, Ethiopian Tewahedo, Orthodox, and King James. Now, I was sitting here listening to the intro, and it said, examining the real cabal and the dynasties that are controlling the world. Well, we did that, and the show has been kind of metamorphosing into more of studying the Ethiopian canon. And the reason being is because after I wrote The Breath War, after studying the cabal and what they're after is our Lush. In fact, I've learned that Satanists, Luciferians, one that actually kill people in their rituals, their last breath of the person that comes out of them, they suck in. So that's a true vampire. They're sucking in the last breath. And we've talked about the breath. We've talked about the fact that Adam, the first breath that God gave him as he breathed through his nostrils was the breath of life and also the spark of life. And apparently, I don't know if it's true or not, but the occultists suck in the last breath of a person. So maybe the last breath is supposed to go back to God, like, back to him. So you go back to him, right? He gives you a part of him, then a part of him go back to him. And that's what they're waiting for, what they're trying to get. We, for the past few months, have shifted in another direction. And the reason being is because, well, there's really nowhere else to go. Once you find the main people, right? Because this show is called Cause Before Symptom. Once you find the Orsini and Lee family and you know exactly what's going on, there's really not much, there isn't anywhere else to go. Unless I just start deep diving into, what they're doing. But all we're really doing is exposing their stuff. I'm sorry for yawning. One of those days. Oh, and which, by the way, I wanted to let you guys know that it looks like we're transitioning my son, Oliver, who is deaf and autistic. He's turning 18 this month, into a group home. And it looks like the transitioning is going to start on Monday. So that's going to be interesting. So with him not here and me having more time, I don't know, the show may go in another direction. I have no idea. And I'm not trying to be apologetic about it because, this show really, it's not growing any. But I really do feel that the direction that we're going with the show, with the Ethiopian and King James, all of that is temporary as well. So we're going to be continuously finding the cause of issues in the world and giving it a Christianity point of view on it. But for now, I've just been obsessed with the Ethiopian story. And so we're going to continue doing our work on it. So just to give you guys a heads up as to, what my plans are. My plans are to finish the Ethiopian examination of the entire King James Bible. And then after that, I don't know where we're going to go. But that's kind of where we are right now. So if you guys are thinking, oh my God, because I know this kind of stuff is very dry. Everybody wants something more concrete, something more of a shock and awe value. And well, for a long time, it seemed for a year, every day, I was just God was just giving me shock and awe stuff. And right now it's kind of slowed down, and that's just how it is. It's never going to be, shock and awe every day. That's why sitcoms only last up to 10 years because, well, they run out of stuff. Anyway, so tonight we're examining Part 18, the examination of Proverbs between the Ethiopian Orthodox and the King James Version. Now, Proverbs does not sing like Psalms, and it does not wrestle like Job. Proverbs instructs. It gathers wisdom into brief, concentrated lines that cut directly into conduct, speech, leadership, wealth, discipline, and desire. And here, covenant theology becomes daily practice. Now, the book opens up with a single anchor. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and everything that follows grows from that root. Well, wisdom is not abstract intelligence. It is aligned with divine order. And the path of righteousness and the path of the wicked are set side by side repeatedly, not to threaten, but to clarify consequence. Now, in Proverbs, God is not addressed as often in lament or praise. Instead, his presence undergirds moral structure. Honest scales matter because he weighs. Pride collapses because he resists it. Plan succeed or fail under his oversight. And divine character is expressed through the architecture of reality itself. Now, the Ethiopian Tewahedo witness and the King James rendering will again, on this book, stand side by side because Proverbs is built on parallel couplets. Small lexical shifts can alter tone. Yes. Fear may sound like dread or reverence, and instruction may sound like correction or formation. But regardless, precision will matter. So the question remains consistent with earlier examinations. Does translation alter theology, or does it shape cadence? Well, in wisdom literature, harshness and mercy are often implied rather than declared, and consequence appears as natural order rather than dramatic judgment. So Proverbs presents a world where righteousness stabilizes and folly dissolves. It closes with strength embodied in faithful living. Between its opening call and final portrait, wisdom speaks in the streets, at the gates, in the home, and before kings. So instruction replaces argument, discipline replaces debate, and wisdom stands at the center here. So the investigation now turns to whether the moral architecture of Proverbs remains steady across both traditions or canons. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm excited. It's going to be another great show, a learning experience. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior is Boots Hafner here live with us saying, hello, Pastor James Carner, voice of the Rumble airwaves and creator of ElitePotion.com. Hello, warrior family. Nice to meet you all. Just hit that X and then the thumbs up and then live chat and you won't lose your spot. Thank you for the reminder, Boots. Do me a favor. Take your thumb right now on the live chat area in the Rumble app and hit the X and then hit thumbs up just with me if you can, and then hit live chat. You won't lose your spot. And you just help me win some brownie points with Rumble because they judge me based on how many likes I get and not based on, well, you know. All right, number two, warrior is Texas militia official. Texas, what's going on? He says howdy with the cowboy emoji. Thank you. We know it's you. It's really you. And Jeffrey is number three warrior saying, hello all. I've been telling people about your content because everyone is asking questions about everything, the sacrifices, the rituals, and the files. Man, I'm happy normies are waking up. Yeah, they actually are. They actually are. And at what cost? Because Satan is now just letting the cat out of the bag. Why? Is it because he wants to start conditioning us into worshiping him? I mean, it's all coming out now. You know, people are starting to learn, oh my God, it's, you know, Satan's been running the show. And well, Satan wants to be the one that gets all the worship in the end. So, something to think about. Jeffrey also says, hey, Boots, I'm so happy everyone would call the theorist crazy, dumb, and idiots. Guess what? Everyone is now joining the wagon and now searching for the truth. Amen to that. Boots also follows up, says, conspiracy trap. Yeah, we had that show. I did it once. I did not do it tonight. I was just too tired. But yeah, conspiracy trap is a real thing. I started it on TikTok and did it once. and I don't know if I'll go back and do it again, but it was kind of fun. I had Boots. I had who else? John Balls, and I had Sheila, and also some lady by the name of Cora, and everyone was having fun. It was actually kind of fun. And the thing about the show is it really it was good at getting you to think, what are the conspiracy trap words that will trigger a response from DARPA or from the government or from, people who get triggered and then, flag your account. And I don't know why I did it. I just, I'm just trying to find clever ways of being able to talk about, all of these crazy Luciferians and all of their actions. And, that's the only way I can think of to come up with shows. But it's quite entertaining. And then Boots follows up with, hey, Jeffrey, exactly. And waving a hand. All right, guys. Well, thank you for being here. Let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
All right, let's get into news, not use. All right, so Nancy Guthrie's son pleads for mother's return. Okay, hold on. I gotta blow my nose for this one. Okay, so I did a little bit of research, and apparently, 80-year-old Anna, I can't remember her name, Susanna's mother, out of the blue, gets abducted, and the FBI released today that the abductors gave up until 5 o'clock to get their demands. I don't know how much it was, but Susanna Guthrie, oh, her name was Nancy. Her mother's name was Nancy. She got abducted, and now, and I don't know if you know the history of Susanna Guthrie, but she's, been in the news. She's a news anchor, I believe, and she turned into a talk show news anchor. I don't know. I don't care. But it's very strange because I don't see her as being that rich, to snatch her mom. And her mom's like 80, and they don't have any of her medications, and she's got a bad heart. And so it really sounds like just a really bad idea for someone. I don't see this being a government conspiracy where the government would use this to, distract us for something. I don't see that. I just think it was someone who probably knew that the Guthries lived near them. And my best guess, I'm just guessing, I don't have any proof, is that, they decided, hey, we could do more meth if we, if we snatch an old lady. And hey, isn't Susanna Guthrie's mom like next door? Yeah, we could do it. I think that's what this really is. And we'll see what happens. But unfortunately, 80 years old and without her meds, she's not feeling too well right now. And it's a sad story. It sucks. I'm sorry. I didn't do it. So, prayers and discernment for the Guthrie family. Trump rejects call from Russia's Putin to extend cap on nuclear deployments. Well, they say Trump rejects call. That's kind of a funny headline. Maybe Putin called while he was in a meeting. Does that mean he rejected? I mean, come on. But anyway, who cares? Nuclear war, if it hasn't happened by now, it's just not going to happen. All it is it's a tool to keep us in fear. Who cares? Okay? I'm not going to let the thought of nuclear war keep me in fear so I won't live in peace and I won't have joy. You shouldn't either. New Jersey House primary special results, 2026 live results. New Jersey, is it going to be red or blue? I don't know. Who cares? Because guess what, guys? Red and blue work together. From the Bank for International Settlements, who we have proved. Remember, on this show, I don't put anything unless I have proof. We prove that they are controlling the world through finances. The Bank for International Settlements is the central bank of central banks. And the left and the right, although from a bird's eye view, looks like they're fighting each other, but the truth is the left is working for China because China has been trying to get a hold of and control America's ports ever since George Bush Sr. became the CIA director and did a deal with China. And they've been slowly gaining control and buying up parts of America to get that control. And the other side, the red, was controlled by the Orsini clan, whom took control of the world from the Breakspear family 250 years ago. And it just so happens that the Breakspear family passed the mantle from them through the Dent family to the Lee family. That's the information that I found. Is it true? Is it not? I don't know. But I have enough documentation to support that it's strong in the truth. So there you have it. U.S. and Iran talks to begin as fears of direct conflict continue. Ooh, what does that mean? Who gives a shit? If we just go and blow up Iran, what is it really going to do? Are we going to get their oil? We don't need it. We've got Venezuela. So really, what's going on right there? Political tool to keep you living in fear, thinking the end of the world is coming. Stop believing in the bullshit, okay? Have discernment. Our Bible tells us to stop worrying. Worry for nothing. Be of good cheer. Be happy. Well, the news is made specifically so you are not happy. So who's responsible for your happiness? Is it world events? Is it the devil? Is it God? Or is it you? It's you. Trump's online drugstore opens for business. Woo, everybody gets cheap drugs thanks to Trump. Democrats' 10 demands to rein in ICE, the full list of proposed reforms. Here's our demands, even though we opened back up the government. But we still have demands, even though we opened up the government. But we still have demands. Wow. Sounds like the Democrats have a lot of power. Not anymore. So, again, use discernment. Chill out, honey bunnies. Everything's going to be okay. It's just a bunch of babies controlling the world. They still haven't learned how to pull the thumb out of their mouth. And they have more money than you. And so what? If you're unhappy because of the way the world is, that's on you. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Part 18, Examination of Proverbs, between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and the King James Bible. It's going to be quite an interesting event. I want you guys to stick around.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
Every year, millions of Americans sign a contract they don't even know exists. They think it's just another tax return, but that signature means something far deeper. It starts with that first job at 16. The system takes a piece of her check, then promises to give some back if she signs the return. Every April 15th, the same cycle repeats, not by law, but by belief. The system didn't bind them, their own signature did. Learn the truth at unincorporatedassociations.com.
All right, we're back, guys, and we're going to be talking about part 18, examination of Proverbs between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and King James. Now, Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, does not raise its voice. It actually sharpens it. After Job's anguish and Psalm's songs, the tone then changes. There is no whirlwind. There is no harp. There is no instruction. Just short lines, parallel phrases, direct warnings, clear contrasts. As wisdom here is not dramatic, it is simply disciplined. Now, the book opens by declaring that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Everything else builds from that foundation. Now, everything else builds, and intelligence without reverence is incomplete. Skill without alignment is unstable. And wisdom is not cleverness, it's ordered living, according to Solomon. Now, a father speaks to a son, a teacher speaks to the simple. A voice calls in the streets, and wisdom is personified as calling publicly, not hiding in mystery, like the Freemasons. Folly is also personified, alluring and allowed. And the battleground is not just simply a cosmic spectacle, it's a daily choice by you. The path imagery repeats again and again throughout this book. There is a way that leads to life, and there is a way that leads to destruction. Only two ways. Light and darkness alternate across couplets. And righteousness is described as steady, wickedness as unstable. The tone is not explosive here. It's simply cumulative. Now, God in Proverbs is rarely addressed directly. Instead, he is assumed. He weighs hearts. He directs steps. He opposes pride. He blesses diligence. Divine character is embedded in moral structure. Consequences flow from alignment, or rebellion is naturally as harvest from seed. Discipline appears not as rage, but as correction. And the one who loves is the one who reproves. As authority is fatherly rather than tyrannical. The fear of the Lord is not panic, it is orientation. The aphorisms move very quickly in this book. A gentle answer turns away wrath. Pride precedes destruction. A soft tongue breaks bone. And life and death are in the power of the tongue, as wealth gained unjustly fades away, and integrity outlasts deception. And the closing portrait of strength does not depict conquest. It depicts faithful labor, generosity, foresight, and reverence. Strength is clothed in dignity as wisdom culminates in character. So the question remains consistent. Does translation sharpen severity or soften instruction? Does fear sound like terror or reverence? Does discipline sound like punishment or formation? Well, in a book built of belief or of brief lines, lexical nuances carries weight. So Proverbs stands as architectural. It assumes divine stability. It assumes moral order. It assumes consequence woven into reality. So there's no spectacle here. There's simple structure and guidance and fear that leads to life, because wisdom speaks and the path has been set. So Proverbs begins with purpose before principle. It identifies its authorial frame and then immediately states its objective: formation of moral perception. The opening lines in both the Ethiopian rendering and the King James align very closely in structure. The stated goals include wisdom, instruction, understanding, justice, judgment, equity, prudence, knowledge, and discretion. The progression moves from simple awareness to cultivated discernment. Now, the first 6 verses build momentum through parallel infinitives: to know, to perceive, to receive, to give. Wisdom is not static information, it is relational formation. It is something received and something increased. And the crucial anchor appears in verse 7. Here's the Ethiopian rendering. This is Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now here's the King James Version. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The wording is nearly identical. The theological hinge is on the word fear. In both traditions, fear translates the Hebrew yirah, which can signify reverence, awe, moral trembling, or covenant respect. Now, neither stream renders it as terror, neither substitutes love or respect. The term remains very weighty. And the tonal perception, however, can vary by reader, because in the modern English, fear, the word fear, may sound punitive. In ancient covenant context, it signals orientation, an acknowledgement of divine authority that structures wisdom itself. And the second half of the verse reinforces contrast as fools despise wisdom and instruction. Well, the word despise appears in both. The moral division is sharp, and there is no neutral ground here. The important observation in the opening section is what does not occur. There is no threat of immediate wrath. There is no dramatic judgment scene. The architecture of reality itself is presented as moral. So wisdom begins with reverence. Folly begins with dismissal. And across both traditions, divine character is presented as foundational rather than volatile. So the fear of the Lord is not introduced as dread of punishment, but as the starting point of perception. Edge is here. What's going on, Damon? The tone here is instructional, not explosive. The difference between the Ethiopian rendering and the King James is negligible in doctrine. The cadence may differ slightly depending on capitalization or flow, but the theological anchor is the same. Now, Proverbs begins by establishing that wisdom is relational before it is practical. Alignment precedes application. And the section will move into wisdom's public call, where tone becomes sharper and consequence more pronounced. And before we proceed, I want you guys to understand that Solomon here in Proverbs, he wrote Proverbs after he brought idols into the temple. And this is his way of repenting to offer a book that offers wisdom in the Lord's eyes. And this book was accepted by Rome, by Ethiopia, by the Catholic Church, the Vatican, and all others. So, did Solomon repent and then write it? Something to think about. Now, after establishing that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, Proverbs personifies wisdom. It does not hide in temples or scrolls. It carries aloud in public spaces. The moral order is not secret, it's simply announced. In the Ethiopian Witness, Proverbs 1:20 through 23, it says, and I quote, Wisdom calls aloud outside. She raises her voice in the open squares. She cries out in the chief concourses. And at the openings of the gates in the city, she speaks her words. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn at my rebuke. Surely I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. That's the Ethiopian. Here's the King James, same verse. Wisdom crieth without. She uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse. In the openings of the gates in the city she uttereth her words, saying, How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge? ? Turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. So again, the structure here is nearly identical. The Ethiopian rendering reads, calls aloud, where King James reads, crieth, and the latter reflects Older English cadence. The former clarifies for modern ear, and the theology remains unchanged, as wisdom is vocal, not passive. So the rebuke is directed at three groups: the simple, the scorner, and the fool. In both traditions, the moral categories are firm. Simplicity is not innocence. It is willful immaturity. Scorning is not curiosity. It is contempt. Now, the phrase, turn at my rebuke, and turn you at my reproof, two different phrases, King James and Ethiopian, carries the same imperative, however. Correction is offered before consequence unfolds. And the next section actually intensifies tone. Here's the Ethiopian witness, Proverbs 1:24-27. I read, quote, because I have called and you refused, I have stretched out my hand and no one regarded. Because you disdained all my counsel and would have none of my rebuke, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your terror comes like a storm, and your destruction comes like a whirlwind. Here's the same verses in King James. Because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand and no man regarded. But ye have set at naught all my counsel and would none of my reproof. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind. Well, this is one of the most debated tonal passages in Proverbs. The language of laughter and mockery appears in both traditions without delusion. The Ethiopian reads terror and storm, while the King James reads fear and desolation. The imagery here remains violent and sudden. The laughter is not frivolous delight of God. It reflects a reversal. The one who mocks wisdom becomes the object of irony when consequence arrives. So the theological question is whether this portrays divine cruelty. And when the literary frame, within the literary frame, wisdom speaks as moral order personified. The laughter signals inevitability rather than emotional volatility, and rejection produces consequence. So the structure is judicial, not impulsive. God isn't really laughing and mocking. He's saying that it will happen to you on earth. And the final lines clarify the outcome. Here's the Ethiopian canon, Proverbs 1:32-33, and it says, and I quote, for the turning away of the simple will slay them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But whoever listens to me will dwell safely and will be secure without fear of evil. Here's that same verse in the King James. For turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. But whoso hearkeneth unto me shall dwell safely and shall be quiet from fear of evil. Here, the contrast remains very sharp. Security is promised not through escape from consequence, but through alignment with wisdom. And the tonal differences between complacency and prosperity, between fear and terror, influence nuance, but not structure. The moral architecture stands firm in both. Wisdom calls publicly, rejection precedes consequence, security follows listening. So there's no arbitrary anger here from God. There is structured outcome. It's a warning. And it's not that God hates you. He's saying, dude, if you listen to the devil, they're going to hurt you, mock you, laugh at you. If you just listen to me, you'll be safe. So the fear of the Lord introduced in verse 7 now unfolds as the dividing line between safety and self-destruction. What's up, Scorpion? So the next section here moves from public proclamation to personal trust. And this section is among the most cited in wisdom literature. It distills covenant posture into three different movements. One is trust, acknowledgement, then humility. Both traditions render the opening line almost identically. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. They both say that. The key word is trust. The Hebrew root carries the idea of confident reliance, not passive belief. And the Ethiopian rendering maintains direct clarity. The King James uses identical language but may carry older cadence and adjacent lines. That means when you're reading the King James Version from the beginning all the way up until now, there's a different tonal heart of God that you're reading. And if you're not guarded in the mercy and love of God, you could inadvertently see this as an angry God. But the key word is trust, where it says trust in the Lord with all your heart. And that's the Hebrew root that carries the idea of confident reliance here. Confidence reliance, the key word trust, not passive belief. So the Ethiopian rendering maintains direct clarity, and the King James uses identical language but may carry older cadence. So the second clause reads, quote, do not lean on your own understanding. Well, the imagery is structural. Leaning suggests weight-bearing reliance. Human reasoning is insufficient foundation. So the phrase remains nearly identical in both streams. Then the next line carries a subtle nuance. The Ethiopian rendering reads, and I quote, in all your ways acknowledge him. Now the King James reads, I quote, in all thy ways acknowledge him. Your, thy, well, the wording appears the same. Yet the Hebrew verb behind knowledge implies national knowing. National knowing. Oh, I'm sorry, not national. That's why I was like, It implies relational knowing, active recognition of authority. It is not mere mental assent. It is the submission of your path. Then the promise follows. Here's the Ethiopian version. And he shall direct your paths. And here's the King James. And he shall direct thy paths. Well, some English traditions render this as make straight your paths. And the difference between direct and make straight shapes tone. Direct emphasizes guidance. Make straight emphasizes moral alignment and removal of obstacles. So the Hebrew supports both dimensions, and neither traditions implies any coercion from God. So the image is just road work, but not domination. And the final line completes the thought here. It says, do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and depart from evil. And again, both traditions align closely on that same. And the contrast is internal pride versus reverent orientation. The fear of the Lord from chapter 1 returns as stabilizing principle. No wrath language appears. No threat imagery is present. Consequence is implied in departure from evil. But tone is instructional, not explosive. So The theological architecture is clear in both traditions. Trust precedes direction, humility precedes clarity, and reverence precedes stability. Now, the lexical differences are minimal in this section. The Ethiopian rendering may clarify modern cadence. The King James retains archaic pronouns and rhythm, but neither alters the doctrine. This passage reveals Proverbs at its most covenantal. The relationship between human agency and divine guidance is cooperative. Trust is commanded, direction is promised. And the next section moves to discipline language, where tone can be misheard if it's not examined carefully. And that's the thing. The King James, whether wrote this way on purpose or not, the languages can give a whole tonal feel of God if you don't have the education of understanding the language at that time. And this is one of the most important verses in the entire book. Both traditions render the passage almost identically. It says, and I quote, "My son, do not despise the discipline or chastening of the Lord, nor be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights." So the King James uses chastening and reproof, and the Ethiopian rendering often reads discipline and correction. Different words, but in the English, we could read it very tonally. But here's where the tone perception actually matters. To the modern ear, chastening can sound punitive. Discipline sounds formative. Makes you feel like God's angry. And the Hebrew word behind both carries the idea of training, instruction, correction through formation. It does not inherently imply rage. It implies shaping. And the second half is also decisive. It says, and I quote, "Whom the Lord loves, he corrects." Well, love precedes correction, as delight accompanies discipline. So there's no volatility here. There's no angry God. Only if you are trained in the Old English ear and understanding the times. There is no unstable anger either. Correction flows from covenant care. The father-son imagery frames the entire concept relationally. If someone reads this as wrath, which they can, if you're thinking wrath while you're reading, it's going to come. Wrath won't come, but it's going to come in your mind. Job challenged whether suffering equals punishment. Psalms wrestled with divine absence. Proverbs reframes correction as training, but not rejection. Across both traditions, this does not diverge doctrinally. The King James does not present a harsher God here. The Ethiopian does not soften the concept either. So the difference is largely lexical modernization. And the deeper truth is structural. Wisdom assumes a moral universe. Correction preserves alignment. Love governs discipline. This is not an angry God. This is a formative Father. But what we've learned from last night's show is that the Catholic Church would, and it's documented, teach something else than what it says. Now, I can't tell you if they taught the angry God version by using the language. Basically, they didn't have to change a thing. The language itself implies it. But to the fourth grade reader level, they wouldn't understand it. And thus, we found evidence that the Catholic Church is guilty of hammering out their translation to the audience that God is angry. And this is how that spirit moved throughout Europe. People were absolutely afraid of God because there are consequences, and those consequences is wrath. It's earthquakes and people falling through it into hell. It's plagues, diseases. But if you don't understand and are not trained theologically, back then, reading the King James in the Old English and understanding the lexicon, you will, if anyone's given you the notion that this Old Testament God is angry, you will read it as angry. And we don't know how or why that happened. We don't know how the language itself could shape it that way, and why the Ethiopian canon doesn't shape it that way. We just don't know. It just did. Could that be spiritual? Maybe. But we just don't know. Next, we're going to talk about moving into contrast architecture, where righteous and wicked, light and dark come into play. And that is where consequence sharpens. Now, we just clarified discipline as covenant care, okay? If you listen to God, do what he says, you'll be taken care of. You will be in safety, okay? That means you're listening to God, and right before you murder someone, you go, I just can't do this, right? Because back then, we've learned that the children of Israel just couldn't keep 10 commandments, and not for very long either. So covenant care, meaning just obey at least the 10, and you'll be safe. In part, and it also establishes the larger moral architecture of Proverbs. There are two paths, and that's what he's trying to say. And he's like, dude, I know because this is Solomon. I know because I worship God, and I unfortunately had to worship the devil. Even though he didn't worship the devil, he still commanded the devil. And in his wisdom, thought that he wasn't worshiping the devil, but the devil was using him anyway. So he was deceived. So Proverbs 4 develops the path imagery with sustained clarity. Both traditions render the core line similarly. It reads, and I quote, "The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble." Now, the Ethiopian rendering tends to read light of dawn or morning light. But the King James reads, shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. So the phrase perfect day in the King James can sound eschatological to modern readers. The Hebrew simply implies fullness, completeness, and maturity. The Ethiopian rendering may clarify this progression more naturally in contemporary English. But the doctrine remains identical. Righteousness is progressive illumination, for lack of a better word. Illuminati. So the contrast is stark here, but it's not emotional. That is, if you understand the King James English lexicon of those days. Darkness is not described as cured or cursed spectacle. It is described as blindness. And wickedness collapses because it cannot see. Wickedness operates in the dark. It's blind. And Proverbs 10 intensifies the parallel structure through its aphorisms. It says, and I quote, "A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death." Well, sin leads to death. The more sin in your life, the quicker you are to croak. But righteousness delivers you from death. So the King James often reads delivereth with older cadence. And the Ethiopian rendering modernizes verb tense. But neither shifts the moral axis here. One subtle lexical area requires attention, however. When Proverbs says, "The Lord will not allow the righteous soul to famish, but he casts away the desire of the wicked." That's as rendered in many English streams. And in the King James uses casteth away the substance of the wicked. Well, substance may sound material. Desire or craving shifts emphasis inward. So the Hebrew term carries the sense of appetite or longing. And the Ethiopian rendering often leans toward internal desire. So the King James may sound more materially concrete, as the theological implication remains consistent here. Unrighteous gain does not stabilize. And this also can be said about too big to fail companies, because they gain through unrighteousness. It will not stabilize. They will fall. They will break. They will be split up into different companies after a monopoly is called. And another key proverb here is the fear of the Lord prolongs days, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. Well, that's weird, because Iron Maiden said this differently. Didn't they say, "Only the good die young. Always evil, always lasts forever"? Well, that's not what Proverbs says. The years of the wicked will be shortened. And neither tradition softens this. It's not presented as arbitrary cutting off. It is structural consequence here. A life aligned with wisdom tends towards stability, and a life aligned with folly destabilizes itself. So all these Luciferianisms, eating blood, eating kids, eating all that stuff, doing all this wickedness just to make God angry, they're going to die sooner. So Aleister Crowley and his writings were wrong. And what is critical here is there is no emotional volatility in these contrasts. there is no sudden divine outburst. There's a pattern here. As light increases, darkness stumbles, integrity stabilizes, corruption erodes, and all across both traditions, Ethiopian and the King James, the tone is architectural rather than dramatic. The King James does not introduce heightened wrath in these couplets, and the Ethiopian does not dilute the consequences. So Proverbs presents moral cause and effect as woven into reality, and divine character is embedded in structure, not displayed through episodic fury. And this strengthens the thesis that Scripture's portrayal of God is stable across genres, as Proverbs reinforces that universe itself is morally ordered. Now we're going to be moving into speech, the tongue, words, and their power. This will sharpen because language in Proverbs actually carries life and death weight. And this is Proverbs 18, Proverbs 12. Now, if Proverbs builds moral character, speech is one of its load-bearing beams. It comes out of your mouth. You actually speak forward blessings or cursings. You can bless someone or you can curse someone without even realizing it. And few themes receive as many sharp couplets as the tongue. Your tongue. And the book treats words not as harmless sounds, but as forces. Power. Both traditions preserve this emphasis with remarkable consistency. A representative proverb reads, and I quote, "There is one who speaks like the piercing of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health." That's Ethiopian. Here's the King James. "There is that speaketh like the piercing of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health." So the Ethiopian rendering clarifies subject, one who speaks, while the King James retains the archaic, "there is that speaketh." The imagery is identical. Speech wounds or heals. The metaphor is surgical, but it's not exaggerated. Another core proverb here, it says, and I quote, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Well, the King James reads almost identically here. The lexical structure does not shift meaning between traditions. Scorpion says, "I believe the angry God is the accuser and was rewritten on purpose." I wish I had the proof for it, Scorpion. I really do. I just don't have the proof. We do have proof in the beginning of the Ethiopian canon because there are definitely stark differences. But as we continue to move forward into this work of understanding the Ethiopian tradition and the King James, it's starting to see that they're both saying the same thing, but one language can change one's perspective if they don't understand the lexicon of the time when it was written. So the King James reads almost identically. The lexical structure does not shift meaning between traditions, and the phrase "eat its fruit" signals a consequence. As speech produces harvest, So the tone here, it's not really mystical. It's structural. Words shape relationships, reputations, and outcomes. And the book does not present speech as magical incantation, but as moral force. This is why Paul always said, hold your tongue, hold your tongue, hold your tongue. Everything that you speak doesn't need to be spoken. We don't have to communicate everything all the time. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. There's no need to add a bunch of other things that's going to complicate the situation. Be very simple in your speech and guard every word that comes from it. Paul got that from King Solomon in Proverbs. So it does not present speech as magical incantation, but a moral force. So a further proverb contrasts concealment and disclosure. Here's an example. He who covers his sins will not prosper. That would be like if I did something bad and I didn't tell anybody about it. Heaven saw it. Maybe not the people, but I will not prosper. But whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. So that means if you sin against someone, get it covered immediately. And that does not mean just pray and get it covered under the blood. If you sin against someone and they don't know about it, that's hiding it. Well, God will take care of it. It's between me and God. No, God doesn't like secrets. And that kind of a secret, even though you claimed the blood and were forgiven of it, this says you will not prosper and you will not have mercy. And this is why a lot of people are having problems in the world, because they have not repented from the covering, the hiding of that sin. Meaning, repent means to turn away from, and you have to openly tell the person you offended. This means here's an example. Here's a real good example. Let's say you're a married man. You go into a massage parlor expecting to just get a simple massage like you've done 100 times. Nothing is on your mind that day as far as sex is concerned. And then, let's say, the person giving the massage goes a little further, and you say no, even twice, and then give in. And then you finish. And then you walk out of there knowing that you, even though you didn't hug and kiss, it was just a happy ending, you still committed a sin against your spouse. And many people really think that this is no big deal. Well, it is. Because you let someone else touch you, not your wife or spouse or husband. You've sinned against them. And to hide that, Proverbs is saying, you will not prosper. And there won't be any mercy for you until you go and tell your spouse exactly what happened. God's not mad at you. He's not angry about it. But he wants the truth to come forward so that it doesn't get you even worse later on. Proverbs is protection language, protecting you from yourself. Hiding from sin, you will not prosper. And that's what it says. He who covers his sins will not prosper. But whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. And this does not mean going to the Father at a Catholic church and saying, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I cheated on my wife. And they say, do 10 Hail Marys and slap yourself two times and then you're good. And then all of a sudden, everything's great. No. That's still covering the sin you sinned against in the dark. Come forth, get it all out, or you will not prosper and you will have no mercy. So the King James reads, shall not prosper and shall have mercy. The Ethiopian rendering often reads, will not prosper, will receive mercy. Let me read it again because I got confused for a second. Yeah, whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. So the difference is tense modernization. The theology actually still remains intact. The word mercy, again, anchors consequence in covenant character rather than random pardon, as confession aligns with moral order, and concealment resists it. Now, another passage warns against gossip. A tale-bearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. So the King James uses tale-bearer and of a faithful spirit. The Ethiopian rendering may use gossip or one who spreads slander. So the modernized term sharpens clarity but does not alter doctrine. And what becomes evident here in this section is that Proverbs never portrays God erupting in anger over speech. Instead, destructive speech carries inherent destabilization. Social collapse follows verbal corruption. And the fear of the Lord continues to operate beneath the surface, as speech reveals orientation. Pride speaks rashly. Wisdom then restrains. So the structural pattern actually holds. 1, words wound. 2, words heal. 3, concealment corrodes. And 4, confession then restores. So across both traditions, there is no measurable theological divergence here. Lexically, or the lexical modernization in the Ethiopian rendering often clarifies imagery for contemporary readers, and the King James retains rhythm and cadence that can sound sharper but does not intensify the doctrine. So speech in Proverbs confirms the larger thesis. Divine character is stable and moral consequence is woven into creation. Next, we're going to examine wealth, pride, and sovereignty over plans, where providence language becomes more explicit. This is Proverbs 11 and 16. So we showed that speech carries consequence. Well, we're going to widen the lens to include wealth, integrity, and divine oversight. As here, Proverbs becomes explicit about providence. Human plans are real. Divine sovereignty is ultimate. An essential proverb appears in this chapter. It says, the preparations of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Now, the King James renders it almost identically. The Ethiopian rendering may clarify cadence, but the structure remains the same. Human intentions exists, and final outcome rests with God. It's not fatalism. It's hierarchy, as planning is permitted and completion is governed. And another foundational verse follows. It says, I quote, "A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." So the King James reads, a man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. The archaic verb deviseth can sound calculated or strategic, and the Ethiopian rendering may read plans more plainly. So the theology is still steady, human agency is real, but divine direction is final. And the passage is crucial for a broader arc. God is not reacting. He's not scrambling. He just directs steps. So the same chapter intensifies the pride theme. It says, I quote, "Everyone proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though they've joined forces here, none will go unpunished." The King James uses "though hand join in hand." The Ethiopian rendering may interpret the idiom more directly. The moral meaning remains unchanged. Pride destabilizes. And the word abomination appears in both traditions. It carries covenant weight here. Yet even here, tone is judicial rather than explosive. The proverb states outcome, not emotional volatility. And Proverbs 11 sharpens wealth language here. It says, I quote, "He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage." Now the King James reads, "shall fall," and "shall flourish" as a branch. The Ethiopian rendering may read, "like a leaf," or "like a green foliage." Well, the imagery remains botanical and organic. Wealth is an unstable foundation. Righteousness produces growth. Meaning the less sin in your life, the more stable and wealthier you will be. And another key verse here is, "Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight." That means selling something that is worth less, but you made more. That's a dishonest scale. That's an abomination to God. Now, the King James retains identical structure here. The contrast between abomination and delight is very stark. Yet the emphasis is moral integrity, not ritual fury. So God delights in justice, but he rejects manipulation. If you are a Christian and you have a product or something that you're selling, let's just say, a car, and you know it's only worth $7,000, but you sell it to someone who doesn't know and they pay $10,000 for it, that does not delight God, and it's not going to help with your wealth. That's moral integrity. And one of the most cited sovereignty verses then follows. "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." So that means when you say, all right, I'm asking $10,000 for it, and you know it's worth $7,000, and the person pays you, you just casted the lot. And the King James reads nearly identically here. The Proverbs acknowledges randomness at the surface level, yet affirms ultimate governance. And this is perhaps the clearest statement of quiet sovereignty in Proverbs. There is no thunder, there is no spectacle, there is governance beneath probability. And across both traditions, the tone remains stable. The Ethiopian rendering may modernize idioms, but the King James preserves older English rhythm. So neither introduces theological aggression here. What becomes clear is that pride collapses because it resists order, and wealth fails when trusted as ultimate, and plans operate under oversight. Justice delights God. Now, let's say during that thing, you know it's worth $7,000, and you say to the person, it's worth $7,000. What would you like to pay for it? And they say $10,000. That's a whole different thing. Because what if that person wants to bless you because you need that extra $3,000? That's not a sin. That doesn't hurt the other person. The other person says, look, I believe it's worth 10,000. I want to pay 10,000 for it, even though it's worth 7,000. So there is no image of an unstable deity reacting emotionally to wealth or planning. Instead, moral structure is woven into the fabric of life. So this isn't God reacting, saying, well, I'm going to pull your wealth now. Nope. The fabric of life, all the laws that govern our life, all the atoms, everything will listen to your actions and what you speak and what you do. And if you hurt others by cheating them, it's going to affect you because the life around you isn't going to offer you abundance. So God's trying to warn you of that. So this strengthens the cumulative thesis. Proverbs portrays a God whose character is very steady, whose justice is principled, and whose sovereignty is comprehensive but not chaotic. So next we're going to move to kingship, where authority and divine direction intersect directly. Now, Proverbs moves from individual morality to political authority. This is where President Trump really needs to read. The focus narrows to kings, rulers, justice, and governance. If earlier sections addressed personal wisdom, this section addresses public power. The defining verse appears at the opening of chapter 21. It says, and I quote, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, like the river of water. He turns it wherever he wishes." Now, the King James reads similarly. That was the Ethiopian. The King James says, "What's up, Robert? The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will." So the lexical differences are minimal. Turneth versus turns, same thing. Whithersoever versus wherever, same thing. And the imagery remains agricultural. Irrigation channels in ancient fields were redirected at will, and the king's heart is compared to that. So this is the strongest sovereignty statement in Proverbs, as it does not say God crushes kings. It does not say he panics at rebellion. It says that God simply directs. So the tone here is controlled, but it's not dramatic. We're not talking about an angry God here. And the metaphor is gentle but decisive. And one thing I do want to add is, since we've been doing this examination of King James and the Ethiopian canon, it's really helped us understand both, and especially the King James version, that God isn't angry. He's trying to warn us of how the laws are put together, and if we don't follow them, if we steer off path after we learn what they really are, there's nothing he can do. You will be the victim of the devil or nature itself. Another key proverb in this chapter, it says, "To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." To do righteous and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. That means if you do something righteous, or if you just sacrifice something, doing righteousness is more acceptable. The King James reads, "To do justice and judgment is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." So the Ethiopian rendering may say righteousness and justice, while the King James uses justice and judgment. Well, the pairing shifts slightly in English nuance. But the Hebrew structure binds ethical action above ritual performance. That's kind of a differentiator there. But this echoes themes seen earlier in Psalms. Sacrifice without justice is insufficient. Across both traditions, God's delight centers on moral alignment and not ceremonial compliance. And another line sharpens authority. It says, I quote, "Every way of man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the hearts." So the King James uses nearly identical language. The key word is weighs, as divine evaluation is measured, not explosive, and God assesses internal motive. A further proverb addresses the outcome here. It says, I quote, "There is no wisdom or understanding or counsel against the Lord." So the King James reads very similar. The structure is absolute. Human strategy cannot overthrow divine governance. Yet again, tone is declarative, not threatening. And the final key verse of the chapter is this, I quote, "The horse is prepared for the day of battle, but deliverance is of the Lord." So the King James reads, "Safety is of the Lord." So the difference between deliverance and safety shapes nuance. Deliverance emphasizes rescue. Safety emphasizes preservation. Both imply ultimate dependence on divine sovereignty rather than military strength. Yet to the untrained eye could read it indifferently. So Proverbs speaks directly to power. As kings rule, armies prepare, strategies form, but the decisive layer rests above them. And across both traditions, the portrayal of God remains very steady. If you understand the English cadence, if you understand the Old English, he directs hearts, he weighs motives, he values justice over ritual, and he overrides human arrogance. So there's no portrayal of impulsive wrath, but there is actually no divine insecurity before rulers, as sovereignty is very calm. And this strengthens the cumulative argument that I've been building since Genesis here. Authority in Scripture is stable and structured. It's not chaotic and reactionary. So Proverbs, it closes not with abstract philosophy, but with embodiment. Wisdom is no longer personified as voice crying in the streets. Wisdom is actually lived. And the final portrait is practical, economic, relational, and disciplined, and even reverent. And the opening line is familiar in both traditions. It says, I quote, "Who can find a virtuous woman?" Who? "For her worth is far above rubies." And the King James uses virtuous woman. The Ethiopian rendering often reads woman of strength or capable wife. It's kind of a big difference there if you're not understanding the English cadence. Capable wife, woman of strength. Now, this is crucial lexical nuance here. The Hebrew term behind virtuous, it carries the idea of strength, capacity, valor, and competence. But do we ever really use that in modern English? Not really. I'm looking for a virtuous employee. The King James word virtuous can sound primarily moral or passive in modern English, as the Ethiopian rendering that emphasizes strength and capability aligns more closely with the Hebrew scope. Now, this woman is not merely modest, she is industrious. The text continues describing commerce, planning, and foresight. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. Well, the King James reads, "She considereth a field and buyeth it." So the cadence does kind of differ, but the meaning does not, and she operates with economic intelligence. Another line says, "She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms." Well, the King James reads, "She girdeth her loins with strength." And the phrase girdeth her loins can sound archaic or physical in the narrow sense, as the Ethiopian rendering often clarifies the metaphor as preparedness and capability. But the Hebrew implies readiness for labor, not sensuality. And her speech is also addressed. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is the law of kindness. Well, the King James reads similarly. The phrase law of kindness is preserved in both. Speech once again becomes moral instrument. And the climax appears near the end. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. So the King James reads, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain. The word vain is Older English, means fleeting or empty, and modern readers may mishear it as pride. So the Ethiopian rendering clarifies temporality rather than ego. And the final anchor returns to the beginning of Proverbs, the fear of the Lord. Wisdom began with reverent orientation, and it ends with reverent embodiment. So there's no wrath language here, no thunder, no judgment. The book concludes in stability and household order or generosity to to the poor, strength under pressure, and reverent fear. And the differences between traditions in this section are primarily lexical and idiomatic. The King James preserves poetic density and archaic cadence, and the Ethiopian rendering often clarifies strength-oriented nuance embedded in the Hebrew. So neither shifts theology, but what emerges very clearly is wisdom is not abstract. Fear of the Lord produces strength. Strength produces stability. Stability produces praise. So the book closes the way that it began, reverence as a foundation. Now, Proverbs does not end with spectacle. It ends with structure complete. And from the beginning, in the opening declaration that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, to the closing portrait of a life shaped by that fear, the book forms a closed circuit. Reverence begins the journey. Reverence then crowns it. And across both traditions examined, one pattern remains unmistakable. God is not portrayed as emotionally volatile. He is portrayed as foundational, if you understand the English cadence. Now, within literature, and wisdom literature does not argue God's existence. It assumes him. So it does not dramatize his anger, and it embeds his justice into consequence. But it does not soften moral order. It reveals it as woven into creation. So the reoccurring phrases across the book reinforces this. The Lord weighs hearts. The Lord directs steps. The Lord delights in justice. The Lord opposes pride. So these statements appear in nearly identical form in both the Ethiopian rendering and the King James Version if you are scholarly and understand the King James lexicon. But differences are almost entirely lexical modernization or idiomatic clarification. So where the King James may sound sharper due to archaic terms like abomination or chastening or vain, the Ethiopian rendering often clarifies tone without altering that structure. So where the Ethiopian clarifies strength or discipline, the King James preserves poetic density. So what we're saying is they both still go together very well. So the fear of the Lord remains reverent orientation, but not terror. And discipline remains formative love and not fury. And consequence remains structural outcome and not emotional eruption. So Proverbs then strengthens the long arc of this investigation as Genesis establishes more moral order. And Job tested divine justice under suffering. And Psalm expressed covenant relationship and emotion. Then Proverbs embeds that covenant into daily life. So if one were searching for evidence of an unstable deity, Proverbs would not provide it. Instead, it presents a moral universe governed by consistency. And wisdom here is not mystical insight, it's alignment with reality as God structured it. So the book's final image is not threat, but praise, a life lived under reverent awareness, as the architecture still stands. And in both traditions, the foundation is the same. So to conclude, Proverbs closes the long movement from narrative to poetry to instruction by revealing something steady. Divine character is not revealed primarily through dramatic events, but through structure. Genesis showed origin, and Job wrestled with suffering. Psalm sang emotion, and Proverbs builds architecture. And across the Ethiopian Tewahedo rendering and the King James Version, the differences encountered in Proverbs are overwhelmingly lexical and idiomatic rather than theological. Chastening and discipline, virtuous, strong, vain, passing, turneth and turns. The cadence shifts, and the doctrine, however, does not. So the fear of the Lord remains the anchor in both traditions. It is introduced as the beginning of knowledge and closes the book as the defining quality of strength. And nowhere does Proverbs redefine fear as terror, and nowhere does it portray correction as uncontrolled rage. Discipline is framed as paternal care, and justice is described as measured evaluation. And sovereignty is expressed through guidance rather than eruption. Even in verses that use the word abomination, the tone is judicial, it's not emotional. And the Lord weighs hearts. He directs steps. He delights in honesty. He resists the prideful. And these statements reflect consistency rather than volatility. So wisdom, literature, embeds theology into consequence. It does not present God reacting impulsively to human behavior. It presents a moral universe where alignment produces stability and rebellion produces erosion. In this book, especially, the skeleton and skin analogy becomes very clear. They need to be read together, and the King James preserves poetic density and archaic rhythm. And the Ethiopian rendering often clarifies nuance and strength embedded in the Hebrew. And together they provide dimension. Separately, they remain faithful. Now, Proverbs does not argue that about God's temperament. It assumes his steadiness. The universe is not chaotic. It is very ordered. And the fear of the Lord is not panic before unpredictability. It's reverence before consistency. I mean, it seems to be that way in my opinion. And the examination of Proverbs strengthens the cumulative finding that divine character across genders remains stable, principled, and covenantal. So differences in translation shape perception, but not the foundation. So wisdom here still stands, reverence anchors it, and the structure holds. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Conner. Tune in tomorrow night when we do another examination of the Ethiopian and the King James renderings. Until then, God bless you, Godspeed, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Conner. Go to his website, jamesconner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.